reimagining globalization to bring in those who were not included in the first place. So those who tell me globalization is dead, I say, no, it's not. You others have benefited. Now that it's our turn, don't tell me that it's either dead or not working. Let's reimagine it. And that means that they should decentralize the business, since they want to build resilience globally, to other parts of the globe. But what do I hear? When they want to decentralize, they always tell me they're leaving China to go to other countries in Asia. And I always ask them, well, what about Africa? What about Latin America? There are many, many of our economies that are doing well enough. We've had examples from some of our leaders here of our own ability to receive these supply chains and to add value to our products. Our trade has stagnated at below 3% of world trade for a decade or more. And that's just not acceptable. And we aren't going to make it better until we add more value to our products. So we all agree on that. The issue is attracting these supply chains to decentralize on our continent and attracting our own business people. Charity begins at home, and this is the Africa Business Conference. So whatever we're doing, they should be the ones also opening up supply chains, investing here, and they are. Many of them are investing. So, but what are the issues that we need to solve? Africa has 8% of GDP of global value chains. So its share of global value chains is very low, 8% of GDP, compared to 11% for low-income Asia, low-income, and 20% for some of the developed countries. So we have room to do it. Let's look on it as an opportunity. But what do we need to do? Then we need to look at what is it that is preventing the decentralization. We've got all it takes. President Mahama said Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, between them, produce most of the cocoa that is sold in the world. Botswana produces beef and diamonds and transforms it. It has changed its model. So, but our trade costs are still too high. And we really have to look at that. Our trade costs are 40% higher than the cost in developed countries. Trading among ourselves, in most other regions, when you look, it's cheaper when they trade with each other. But guess what? In Africa, our costs are 20% higher when we are trading with ourselves than when we are trading with outsiders. So meaning that it's cheaper to bring something from Europe or China or whatever than to bring it from Botswana to Nigeria or from Ghana to Kenya. So what are we going to do about that? It's all the things that you've heard. I don't need to repeat. We've got to deal with trade costs. We've got to relook at our infrastructure, our bureaucracy. Business people tell me they cannot cross from one country to the other. So can we, some of our leaders have opened up visas, can we emulate that? So
Nico Dangote said that.
Yeah, you know, they cannot move. There are some things we can really control that don't cost too much money. The WTO has a trade facilitation agreement that all of us are signed up. But Africa's implementation is 61%. In trying to lower these barriers compared to the average of about 77% for the rest of the world. So we do have the instrument. We may not know it, but we signed on to it, but we're not implementing it as fast as we should.
In a crisis, the first thing you do is to focus on stabilizing, and so that's what we're focused on. Bringing interest rates down, bringing inflation down, stabilizing the currency, dealing with the debt overhang. And that's where our focus is for now. But at the same time, to analyze the factors that got Ghana into this place in the first place and put in the steps that ensure that we don't end up here again. And so that would entail looking at the Fiscal Responsibility Act and strengthening it, looking at the Public Financial Management Act and strengthening it, so that tomorrow we don't have a situation where a minister, goes onto the Eurobond market and borrows 11.5 billion over 5 years and puts most of it into consumption. Those are some of the things we need to look at. We need to look at our debt management departments and strengthen it so that it's able to provide information to the public on what our debt trajectory is and keep it being below a certain ceiling. We need to introduce an independent value for money office so that we're making sure that our projects are coming in at the right value and at the right cost. We need to make sure that we cut out waste, reduce corruption. Those are all things that have to be dealt with, and that's what the new government is struggling with. But talking about trade and adding value, which is why we're here, I think that we must look at the comparative advantages we have as Africa and unashamedly exploit those advantages. And I can see that in the place of agriculture and agribusiness. I can see it in the area of our natural resource endowment. How are we indigenizing these natural resources? In the past, we didn't have capital, we didn't have the technology. And so large multinational companies came and took huge concessions and they exploited it to their advantage. A lot of the benefits from exploitation of our natural resources went to the metropolitan capitals. Today, the capital is available if you want it and you look for it. Today, the technology is available. We have situations in Ghana where in the gold mining industry, the bulk of the mining actually is done by indigenous companies. You find a multinational company only where the gold is being poured. And so if we do all the mining, we do the drilling, we do the blasting, we do the crushing, we fill the crushing plants. I mean, we can do the last mile of also pouring the gold and making sure that the benefits of that gold come to our country. It's the same with cocoa. We've exported cocoa beans for God knows how many years. And still we export cocoa beans. There's some processing capacity. It's about 30%. We have the capacity to process almost 500,000 tons of cocoa, but we're not processing that much. We're processing at about 200,000 tons because the cocoa board that needs to be extracted believes that it gets immediate foreign exchange when the beans are traded, and we sell for it, and so they get the money in advance before we even export one bean. But bringing the value addition home will be bringing jobs back so that our young people can get jobs to do, especially putting that processing in the areas where the cocoa is grown.
This is the first point that should compel us to accelerate implementation of the AFCFTA, the ability to establish these regional value chains, and I will go into specific examples. The second reason why I believe your question is relevant is again related to the topic. 2-3 years ago, there's a conflict in Europe. That conflict in Europe impacts very negatively on Africa's food security. So you've got upward of 30-35% inflationary pressures on food prices because we import grains from Russia, Ukraine. When in fact we have grains in Zimbabwe, Malawi. His Excellency the President reminded us that last year Ethiopia had a surplus on wheat, and yet we rely in another part of the world to feed Africa. A country of 43 million people feeding a continent of 1.4 billion people. So we've got to accelerate the establishment of these value chains that enhance our food production capacity. The third important factor that, again, in my opinion, is relevant to your question and should compel us to accelerate implementation of the AFCFTA is what happened in January this year. January, I should be specific, on the 20th of January this year. We have since then increased global protectionism, increased investment protectionism, increased economic nationalism, leading to a complete destabilization of macroeconomic policy, destabilization of market certainty in terms of trade policy. And again, the question for us as Africans is, how do we navigate this in a way that you said this is a crisis, how do we benefit from it? So it's clear to me that we've got to look at the AFCFTA as a tool. 20 years ago, many countries in Africa were exporting about 6-7% of their exports, 20% of their exports under AGOA to the United States. That number has significantly reduced. It's likely to reduce more. You compare that over the same period, 23 years, Africa's exports to China went from 4% up to 17% where we are today. So clearly there's a need for us as Africans to consolidate this domestic market of 1.4 billion people with a purchasing power parity by 2035 of 6.8 trillion United States dollars. But as was said, all of these projections will remain an illusion if we don't consolidate the domestic market, the AFCFTA domestic market. Now, the specific areas where we should focus on, let's look at agriculture. Ministers of Trade, some of them are in the room. We have to advise our heads of states and design trade rules that will eliminate, not reduce, eliminate intra-Africa barriers to agricultural products. The highest tariff on agricultural products intra-Africa is 65%, and yet we have a food insecurity crisis. So we've got to deal with this as a matter of urgency and establish these regional value chains so that the exports of grains from Malawi, from Ethiopia, can feed Africa.